Connor Bedard scores a highlight reel goal while Arvid Soderblom remains one of the best young goalies in the NHL.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just a reminder to please go and hit that like button. Jump in the comment section down below as well. Mailbag Monday is right around the corner. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. I am now less than 10 subscribers away from reaching my goal of 2,000. So please, even if you're tuning in today through an audio platform, jump on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button for me. 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really does help me out tremendously. Last but certainly not least, we got to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which is FanDuel. Be sure to download the FanDuel app to win $200 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins at Super Bowl 59. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. And how about it, Blackhawks fans? Another full-blown kids display last night to lead the Blackhawks to a 4-1 win over the Tampa Bay Lightning in the second meeting between these two teams in the past 5 days. And you can certainly tell that was the case. A rather chippy affair between these two teams. Two squads that, of course, only meet twice throughout the regular season. They won't see each other again here during the 2024-2025 campaign. But yeah, really physical game last night. Nick Foligno seemed like he was on full tilt once again. The guy's been begging for a scrap these last few games, and you could tell the emotions are starting to come out of him a little bit. He absolutely dropped Zemgus Girgensons with a couple of right hands last night. Pat Maroon kind of had some interesting antics waving on the Tampa Bay Lightning bench after getting into a little bit of a skirmish with Eric Chernak, who was acting a little bit like a goon last night. A bad hit on Teuvo Teravainen, bad cross-check that went uncalled on Connor Bedard. The real kicker, though, was the Michael Eyssimont play. Looked like the Lightning were about to go to a power play, down 2 goals late in the third period after Bedard took a bad slashing penalty. Out of frustration, Bedard goes and slams his stick into the boards, and randomly, Michael Eyssimont decides to just go and hit him into the boards, definitely illegally, wound up costing the Lightning their power play opportunity as Eyssimont spent 4 minutes in the sin bin. An absolutely brutal and selfish decision by Michael Eyssimont to take any comeback hopes away from his team. He had full goose eggs in the box score last night. So quick hat tip to Michael Eyssimont for being a dummy and help the Blackhawks snap their little 3-game losing skid. This is also the Blackhawks' first road victory since way back on December 9th against the New York Rangers, if you can believe it or not. Nearly 2 months since the last time the Blackhawks picked up a road win. But felt good to get back in the W column for sure. Actually gives the Blackhawks now points in 5 of their last 6 games. 3 of them, though, overtime losses. They are 2-1-3, though, over their last 6 contests now. The real takeaway from this game last night, though, Blackhawks fans, were the kids. They continue to shine and lead the way for this Blackhawks squad. Hasn't really resulted in a ton of victories over the last couple of weeks, but you could tell the kids are the priority based on the moves the Blackhawks and Kyle Davidson have been making here as of late, and I don't see any reason to shy away from this kid's plan that the Hawks are on here down the second half of the season, because they're the ones who are really leading the charge for this team right here, right now, and no one more so last night than Arvid Soderblom in between the pipes. Oh my goodness, Blackhawks fans. He's had, 6, 7, 8 A-plus type of performances so far this year, and it's been awesome to see him rebound the way that he has, considering how much he struggled these last couple of years. This performance last night against the Tampa Bay Lightning, though, might have been his finest of the season. He only wound up stopping 34 of the 35 shots that he faced, not as high as of a number in terms of saves that we've seen from Soderblom in the last couple of weeks. He's actually had to make at least 34 saves in 4 of his last 6 starts now, but 10 to 12 of them were absolutely phenomenal stops late in the game to keep the Blackhawks ahead. Kind of similar, honestly, to how Soderblom played last Thursday when the Hawks took on the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was outstanding. They just peppered the Blackhawks down the stretch. I think they outshot them 17-1 in the third period on their way to a 4-3 overtime victory. So for Soderblom to go and do it again, this time backstopping his team to a victory, absolutely outstanding stuff from Arvid Soderblom. And as I mentioned off the jump, continuing to prove he's one of the best young netminders in the entire NHL. And as I posted last night on X, imagine telling something I've said on the show a handful of times throughout the course of the season, but imagine telling all of us Blackhawks fans this time last year that Arvid Soderblom was going to become a beloved member of this organization. I mean, Blackhawks fans would have said, Jack, you're absolutely crazy. I would have thrown Arvid Soderblom to the wolves. There are people calling him Arvid Soderblom. But that's why you never quit on young goaltenders, Blackhawks fans. And even though we have seen Arvid Soderblom on the pro scene for the last 4 years now, the kid's still only 25 years old and isn't going to turn 26 until August later on in the summer. And how about these numbers now for Arvid Soderblom this season? Unfortunately, because the Blackhawks are a dumpster fire, his record is 7-11-3, but he's got a 2.88 goals against average. That's currently 35th in the NHL, and a .910 save percentage through 20 starts this season, Blackhawks fans. That's the 15th best save percentage in the entire NHL, and if you go and look at the names who are ahead of him, most of them are solidified veterans or guys who are known as premier netminders in the NHL, and Arvid Soderblom is right there, and out of the top 20 in save percentage in the league right now, only Dustin Wolf, Lucas Dostal, and Arvid Soderblom are 25 years or younger. He was the number one star for the Blackhawks last night. Another epic outing out of Arvid Soderblom. And I think there's no other way to go about it. Soderblom has turned himself into the starter for the Chicago Blackhawks. Mrazek just really hasn't been able to play at the same level prior to that groin injury. That's kind of been a nagging thing for him in his career. The consistency just hasn't been there night in and night out like it was earlier on in the season and throughout all of last year from Peter Mrazek. Arvid Soderblom, though, has been incredible to kind of pick it up when the Blackhawks have needed him to in between the pipes. Outstanding stuff from number 40 last night. Number one star of the game, as I said. Getting into the kids a little bit more, Connor freaking Bedard, Blackhawks fans. A highlight reel goal out of 98 last night from an impossible angle. A short side snipe. Oh, baby. Did this one get me fired up, standing up in front of my television, pounding my chest. Oh my, what a sequence there out of Connor Bedard on the Blackhawks. 5-on-3 power play. That was really what got them back into the game. Down 1-0 after 20 minutes. The Lightning came with a good push in the opening half of the second, but the Hawks capitalize on their power play opportunities. Bedard actually had just hit the post a couple of moments prior to that unbelievable goal, but not only did he have one of his best career highlights, it was just another dominant performance out of Connor Bedard. He now has 44 points through 50 games this year, 18 in his past 17 games, led the team in all individual stats last night, individual expected goals percentage, individual high danger chances, scoring chances, shot attempts. I mean, Bedard was everywhere. And how about this Blackhawks top line? Finally, we have established a top line along with Connor Bedard, Tyler Bertuzzi. I know he didn't wind up on the stat sheet last night, but you know the impact he plays in the dirty areas, in front of the net. Connor Bedard was trying to feed him a couple of different times. Just unfortunately, the puck was bouncing a little bit too much. But the addition of Frank Nazar on this top line has made a world's difference, Blackhawks fans, because we've now fully rounded out the top line. You get Tyler Bertuzzi, who's the grit in the sandpaper, who goes to the front of the net and scores the gritty goals. You got Connor Bedard, who's a human highlight reel, as creative as they come with the puck and an absolute deadly sniper. But you know what they missed on that top line? Was the well-rounded, speedy nature of Frank the Tank Nazar. And Frank has made an impact in more areas than I thought he would in his first NHL stint of the season. Don't get me wrong, Blackhawks fans. I'm not surprised, because if you're someone who's been following along this show for years and years, then you know I've been high on Frank Nazar ever since they selected him 13th overall in the 2022 NHL draft, and there's a reason why he was number one on my midseason Chicago Blackhawks prospect rankings, because not only does he have the skill to play a top 6 game already as a 21-year-old, but he's also got all of the intangibles, man. He makes an impact on the forecheck, on the defensive side of the game. Frank Nazar is playing on the Blackhawks penalty kill and doing a damn good job of it. And the wheels that this kid has, he's probably the second best skater, third best skater probably in this Blackhawks forward group behind only Lucas Reichel and maybe Ilya Mikheyev, but he's definitely one of the best skaters. He's the fastest skater on that Blackhawks top line, and it just gives them a different type of weapon. And as I referenced, a guy with true top 6 level skill. I have been ecstatic with what I've seen out of Frank Nazar so far up in the NHL. He's an absolute stud, man, and he's the type of guy who's going to have his fingerprints all over the Blackhawks' success in the offensive zone, defensive zone, neutral zone, power play, penalty kill. Frank the Tank can do it all, baby, and I am so excited to see how he's going to fare down the stretch of the season. Anders Sorensen, absolutely has to leave him alone with Connor Bedard and Tyler Bertuzzi. Also got to give a shout out to Landon Slaggert, baby. Did make his NHL season debut as expected, skated on the Blackhawks. Third line with Lucas Reichel and Nick Foligno. I'll talk about the lineup decisions here in just a moment. But what an impact out of Landon Slaggert last night, not even with the goal that he scored. Yes, of course, it was lovely to see him go top shelf for his first tuck of the season, which, by the way, I accidentally pulled a Hawks PA announcer with Frank Nazar last week, tweeted out that it was Landon Slaggert's first NHL goal. Shame on me. I'm not perfect. My mistake. Second ever NHL goal for Landon Slaggert. He did score his first NHL tuck after joining on with the Blackhawks following his senior season with Notre Dame last season. But what a shot from Landon Slaggert there in transition. I also liked the drop feed from Lucas Reichel. That now gives him 4 points over his last 7 games. And Anders Sorensen mentioned before the game against the Lightning that he's been really happy with what he's seen from Lucas Reichel. I love to hear that and love to see him again on the third line, up in the lineup a little more, not buried down on that fourth line. Much better role for him here as of late. But yeah, Landon Slaggert was everywhere last night. The forecheck, he was getting shifts on the penalty kill as well. And I love to see that trust out of head coach Anders Sorensen with his youngins. You really, listen, even if they get burned out there, it's always going to be a learning experience. And that really should be what the rest of the season is about for the Blackhawks, giving kids opportunities and letting them learn out there on the ice. But Slaggert was everywhere, man. He brought the effort, made an impact, ended up getting the belt from Pat Maroon for being player of the game. So even without the goal that he scored, I thought Landon Slaggert made an awesome impact. The wheels that he has, there was one sequence where Slaggert chased down a loose puck and won the foot race to get there. That was really impressive to me for a guy who's not really known for his speed. Could be a good bottom 6, jack of all trades type of guy. Landon Slaggert, really solid NHL season debut. Also, got to give a huge shout out to Seth Jones. I know he's not one of the kids, but he has been absolutely dynamite, Blackhawks fans, since that woeful performance a little over 2 weeks ago against the Calgary Flames. He got the memo. He's had to look himself in the mirror. He had to talk to the media about his struggles. He even admitted he hasn't really been happy with his play, but he's picked it up over these last couple of weeks and has once again emerged as the best defenseman for the Chicago Blackhawks, as Alex Vlasic, unfortunately, has been going through some defensive struggles. But again, Seth Jones just has the best skill set on the Blackhawks blue line, and when he's playing the right way, make no mistake about it, he is absolutely a dominant player on the back end, and we saw it last night. And he and Alec Martinez have really started to click and find their groove as the top pairing for the Blackhawks. They were excellent last night. Jones led the Blackhawks game score chart following the final whistle against the Tampa Bay Lightning. He had 2 assists in this game, 3 block shots, 3 hits, 1 shot on goal, and was +3 while leading the Blackhawks with 25 minutes and 30 seconds of time on ice. And that now gives Jones points in 6 consecutive games, 9 points during that stretch. Love to see Seth Jones picking it up, because when he's playing like this, it just gives the Blackhawks such a different gear, particularly on the power play. I think he and Connor Bedard both need to be a little bit more aggressive on the power play, and we've seen that over the last couple of weeks. So shout out to Seth Jones, shout out to the kids, shout out to Michael Asimon for making a brutal decision late in the game to prevent the Lightning from going on a power play. One thing I did also want to bring up before moving on, Blackhawks fans, was the lineup decision. I know a lot of people were frustrated to see that Colton Dach and Nolan Allen were scratched while Landon Slaggert made a season debut. TJ Brodie drew back into the lineup. I'm okay with Brodie coming in every now and then. I like using him as the seventh defenseman, getting him in every now and then. But if he wants to remain in the lineup, he has to play well, and give TJ Brodie credit. He and Ethan Del Mastro played really well last night. He was kind of in the middle in terms of the Blackhawks game score impact chart last night. So I don't know if TJ Brodie, I don't exactly know how Anders Sorensen plans to use him the rest of the way, but what is clear to me is he has to play well to stay in the lineup with the amount of kids that are now on the scene, Ethan Del Mastro being another one. I think Brodie is probably going to be back in there again, considering he played well on Thursday against the Carolina Hurricanes and the Blackhawks won, but I don't agree that Nolan Allen should be scratched for a second consecutive game. And listen, I never mind Nolan Allen or Wyatt Kaiser or even Colton Dach, some of these young coming out for a game to give them a little bit of a refresher. The problem with Wyatt Kaiser was it was happening more than just once. It was becoming a little bit of a frequent thing. Nolan Allen could have a night off, but he needs to be in the lineup on Thursday against the Carolina Hurricanes. I'd honestly like him in there over Ethan Del Mastro. The Canes, really solid and aggressive bunch. I'd rather have Nolan Allen's experience on the back end than Ethan Del Mastro, even though he's had a couple of good games. Not the end of the world to sit a guy like Del Mastro for just one contest. As far as Colton Dach, I agree. He probably should have been in the Blackhawks lineup. I don't agree with Sorensen's assessment that he needs to be a little bit more physical. I thought he's done a better job of that since being up in the NHL, and honestly, even when he was with the Rockford Ice Hogs this year, I think he's got to be back in there Thursday against the Canes. It's just tough to figure out who's coming out. Probably Pat Maroon. And ultimately, even though he is a great locker room vibes guy, Pat Maroon just probably needs to be traded because we got to get these kids in the lineup on a regular basis, and it's also not fair to Pat. He wanted to join on to the Blackhawks in the offseason. It's not fair to him to be regularly healthy scratching him. The best thing for Pat and for the Blackhawks would be to trade Pat Maroon. Maybe Philip Kurashev comes out, but he's been better over the last couple of weeks. I don't know how the Blackhawks are going to go about it, but what's clear up front, on the back end, there's probably one body too many in each of those groups. I'm sure something will give as we get closer to the NHL trade deadline, but there's everything I have from a rather nice 4-1 victory for the Chicago Blackhawks, their first road win since December 9th at Madison Square Garden against the Rangers. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll break down Corey Pronman's U23 player ranking. But first, I do got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is right around the corner. One game, two teams, and endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Because whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff up until the final whistle. And this live betting feature also allows you to stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet down and potentially win $200 worth of bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the cherry on top. So make sure to go and download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today or head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. Again, you can bet just $5, and if that first $5 bet wins, you'll score $200 worth of bonus bets for Super Bowl 59. Again, that's FanDuel.com to bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. Segment 2, about 2 weeks ago now, there's just been a lot going on involving the Chicago Blackhawks. Corey Pronman of The Athletic dropped his U23 NHL player ranking, and several members of the Chicago Blackhawks prospect pool found themselves on that list, so I figured I'd break down Corey Pronman's top 10 on the show here today and also go through where other members of the Blackhawks prospect pool came in on this list. Corey Pronman, one of the better scouts and analysts, not analytics. One of the better scouts and analysts that I usually like to go through in terms of draft rankings, prospect rankings, U23 rankings is something I've done on the show a couple of different times. So I always think it's intriguing enough to bring it up on the show, and I like to hear what he has to say about certain Blackhawks prospects in particular, and also kind of judge where my assessment is on those guys as well. But getting into Corey Pronman's top 10 here, coming in at number 1 is not Connor Bedard. It's Macklin Celebrini, who has been absolutely phenomenal for the San Jose Sharks in his rookie year. And it looks like Macklin Celebrini has all the tools to be a game breaker for a long, long time in this league. And quite honestly, Blackhawks fans, I think there are going to be a lot of future playoff matchups and high-intensity regular season games between Connor Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks and Macklin Celebrini and the San Jose Sharks. I could see this being a battle for a long, long time in terms of which one of these two are going to be the better player, which one of these two are going to wind up with more Stanley Cups. I think they're neck and neck right now, but if I'm being honest, Blackhawks fans, I think you do have to give Macklin Celebrini the edge over Connor Bedard. I think Connor is the more gifted offensive player and has the higher offensive ceiling. Both of them are elite goal scorers and offensive specialists. I think Bedard probably has the better shot, but I think Macklin Celebrini has the intangibles. I think he has the better intangibles than Connor Bedard, and I think he's going to be more of a two-way player. He drives play, I think, is more of a true center iceman than Connor Bedard is. Connor's just so creative with the puck and makes so many special types of plays happen that I think the Blackhawks are just going to let him remain as a center. But Macklin Celebrini shapes up to be a true two-way type of center of the future and someone who I think is going to be really reliable in all facets of the game. And that's just not really Connor Bedard's makeup. So I do understand Corey Pronman having Macklin Celebrini, the younger of the two players, as well, at number 1. At number 2, Corey Pronman has Tim Stützle. And this is where I disagree. Tim Stützle is almost 3 years older than Connor Bedard, and he's not a point-per-game player for the Ottawa Senators. And I know stats aren't the end-all, be-all, and there's a lot that goes into it, the Ottawa Senators. I think I'd absolutely rather have Connor Bedard than Tim Stützle just because of the upside and just because of the age. And listen, I'm not like talking down on Tim Stützle. This is the hard part about breaking down a top 10 rankings here. Tim Stützle is an absolute superstar and a phenomenal player. I just think it's a little crazy to have Tim Stützle over Connor Bedard. I'd have those two switched. I'd have Connor Bedard at 2, Tim Stützle at 3. At number 4, Corey Pronman has Leo Carlsson. Number 5, he has Luke Hughes. 6, he has Matvei Michkov. And I know Matvei Michkov is a winger, man. I think I'd rather have him than Leo Carlsson. That's just me personally, but I've always been higher on Matvei Michkov than a lot of other people. I had him rated higher than Leo Carlsson in the 2023 NHL draft. At number 7 is Jake Sanderson. Number 8 is Zeev Buium. Number 9, Lucas Raymond. I'll tell you what, I know Lucas Raymond is older than a couple. I think I'd rather have Lucas Raymond than. That is tough. That is really tough. Lucas Raymond is already the leading point scorer for the Detroit Red Wings. Like, I know the rest of these guys have high ceilings, but they're still a little bit of a gamble. Like, I think I'd rather have Lucas Raymond than Matvei Michkov. I don't know. That one's really tough. Rounding things out, Corey Pronman has Adam Fantilli coming in at number 10. I think that's a little high for Adam Fantilli as well. But I did want to see what Corey Pronman had to say about all of these Blackhawks prospects in particular. Connor Bedard, the only one that winds up in the top 10. As far as what Pronman had to say about Bedard's skills, he had his skating at above average, which I do think is fair. Bedard clearly is not an elite skater, and that is one of the things that I think is holding him back from being the absolute dominant player that we all expect. He is still a dominant player, right? But with the expectations coming into the league that he had, I think the skating is one of the things that's really holding him back. And he's not a bad skater. He's just not a blazing speed type of skater. He's the type of guy who's going to beat you with his edge work. One thing I do want to make sure to point out, though, the kid's only 19 years old. And the way that Lukas Reichel is skating right now, he was not skating that way when he was 19 years old. Not to say that that's what's going to happen to Connor Bedard, but it's definitely something to keep in mind that Bedsy can still develop his skating because he is still not even 20 years old. But I do agree that his skating is above average. Puck skills, Corey Pronman has them at elite. 100% agree. He has elite puck skills. Hockey sense, high end. I actually agree with that. I know some people will probably say elite just because of the way he thinks the game, but in terms of him trying to do too much, him calling his own number, some bad turnovers from time to time, some shoddy defensive coverage, which he has cleaned up more so during his sophomore season. I agree with that high-end assessment. His compete above average, if Corey Pronman had just average here, I would understand it. Like, Bedard can be chippy, but he's never going to be known as a two-way player, I don't think. He's never going to be a focal point of the penalty kill or anything like that. He's not very good along the boards. He's savvy. He knows how to handle himself for an undersized guy, but I don't know. Compete, I'd probably have around average. Shot high end, though, no, I disagree with that. The shot is elite, even though he hasn't scored as many goals as he probably even would have liked so far this season. It's finally starting to come around, and I do think just with the torque that he had, we saw it last night, Blackhawks fans. This kid can rifle the puck and can score from all angles. He's too talented of a goal scorer. I've talked about his shooting percentage. I think he has the upside to be a 14 to 15% shooter in his career in the NHL. Maybe you think that's crazy. That's truly what I believe. So I think this one's wrong. I think Connor Bedard's shot should be elite, even though we haven't seen that elite shot as much through his first two NHL seasons. But getting into some other Blackhawks that found their way on Corey Pronman's list, the next one at number 22 was Artem Levshinov, who Pronman had classified as a bubble NHL all-star / top of the lineup type of player, had his skating listed as average. I think Levshinov is a little bit better than an average skater, but again, he doesn't have the wheels to be a burner. It's not Kevin Korchinski or Sam Rinzel. Puck skills above average, definitely agree. Hockey sense above average. He thinks the game well, but he also makes decisions like a 19-year-old, which I think is something we have to keep in mind is going to happen. So I guess I do agree with an above average hockey sense. Compete average out of Levshinov. I think it's an above average compete that he plays with. He just kind of makes bad decisions. He's very raw, and it's very clear when you watch him play. His shot is above average as well. I definitely agree. He hasn't scored as many goals in Rockford as I would like to see, but it was on display as a freshman at Michigan State. He's a big boy. He's got good power and good torque on that shot. Continuing to develop that, I think, will be a key for him over this next couple of years, but he does have the ability to be a good goal scorer from the blue line in the NHL. Next, at number 66, Pronman had Kevin Korchinski as a bubble top of the lineup player, above average skating. I think I'd go as far to say that Korchinski has elite skating ability, man. The kid can absolutely fly. I think that's a little bit off. Puck skills, average. I would agree with that. He doesn't do anything like too fancy out there. Hockey sense, average. I think it's above average, to be quite honest. Compete, listed as average. I think that's a fair assessment. Shot, listed as average. I think that's a fair assessment as well. Honestly, might even be a little bit below average. I always think Korch is going to be more of a distributor than a goal scorer from the point. Next, we have Sam Rinzel at 67, one below Kevin Korchinski, was at 66. Also listed as a bubble top of the lineup player with Korchinski. Skating listed as average. That's wrong. Rinzel's skating is at least above average. The kid can absolutely fly. Puck skills, average. That's wrong. I think it's above average. Hockey sense, average. I do agree with that. He still has to clean up decision-making and when to jump up on the rush. He is more of an offensive instincts type of player. Compete, average. Understand that for Sam Rinzel. Shot above average. He's one of the best goal-scoring defensemen in all of college hockey this year. Next at 73, Pronman had Roman Kanserov, also listed as a bubble top of the lineup player. Skating, above average. Definitely agree. Kanserov can fly out there. Puck skills, above average as well. Agreed. He's a dynamic type of player, can score goals and be a facilitator. Hockey sense, Pronman has listed above average. Compete, Pronman has listed above average. I'd probably just list that as average. He does have a good motor and works hard to play a two-way game, but it's in bursts. And I think until we see it against the highest competition in North America, there's always going to be some doubt about what type of true motor Roman Kanserov possesses. And then shot, Pronman has him above average as well. He has above average in all of these. I think skating could be high-end for Roman Kanserov, and I also think his puck skills could be high-end as well. I think he shapes up to be a top six player for the Blackhawks whenever he does come over, hopefully after the 2025-2026 campaign. I know Pronman has all of these at above average, but I'd even go as far to say that the skating and the puck skills are high-end. Next, we got Sasha Boisvert, middle of the lineup player, skating average. I'd agree he is an average skater, and that is the concern about Sasha Boisvert. Puck skills, average. I disagree. I think this could be high end as well. Sasha Boisvert makes some sneaky good creative plays for being a guy who doesn't have the best wheels out there. Hockey sense, average. I think it's too early to tell on that. Compete is definitely not average for Sasha Boisvert, which is what Corey Pronman has it listed. I'd go high-end type of compete out of Sasha. This guy is like Frank Nazar, but he's 6'3". He never stops. He's a big body. I think he's going to be a very good competitor at the NHL level. Shot above average, that's wrong. I think the shot could be elite. I honestly think the shot could be elite from Sasha Boisvert. Reminder, he is a freshman at North Dakota, and I swear he has one of the nastiest releases I've seen in college hockey. I do not agree that it's just above average. It's definitely above average. I think it's high end or possibly even elite for Sasha Boisvert. The goal scoring is always going to be his best offensive weapon. At number 91, Oliver Moore. Look at all these Blackhawks prospects cracking the top 100. Also listed as a middle of the lineup player like Sasha Boisvert. Skating above average, disagree. I think Oliver Moore is an elite skater, elite speed. There are still some things that he has to work on to be a truly elite skater, but he definitely has elite speed, and it's at least high end. It's definitely above average. Puck skills, average. I agree. His hands cannot keep up to his feet yet at all times. Hockey sense, average. I think he has high-end hockey sense and high-end compete. It was listed as above average, but I think Oliver Moore, those are the two areas where he's really going to shine. The hockey sense or the compete, I think those are the areas where he's really going to make his best impact. Shot average, I think it even could be below average. I do not see Oliver Moore being much of a goal scorer at the next level. Always going to be a distributor, a playmaker, and a two-way motor type of guy who can make an impact on the penalty kill and probably on the second power play unit. Next up, we got Lukas Reichel coming in at number 128, also listed as a middle-of-the-lineup type of player, according to Pronman. Skating is listed as average. That's just wrong. Reichel's the best skater on the Blackhawks, one of the best young skaters in the NHL. I'd go high-end. Puck skills above average. I'd honestly just go average here. Like, the skating is probably the best asset for Lukas Reichel. We've seen him putting it together a little bit more here as of late. I don't know if he's ever going to be able to do it enough to be like a top 6 player in this league, but he has average puck skills. Skating, though, I think is his best asset. Hockey sense, listed as average, I agree. Compete, listed as average, I agree. Shot listed as above average. The thing is, I do agree, we just don't see it out of Lukas Reichel. It feels like he's always trying to pass the puck instead of shooting it. I feel like on the wing, he's more inclined to shoot the puck, whereas a center, he's more likely to pass it, and I think he is truthfully a wing. So I'm not going to disagree with this. I do agree it's an above average shot. We just don't get to see it all that often out of number 73. Last but certainly not least on Corey Pronman's list, coming in at number 132, also listed as a middle of the lineup player, Colton Dach. Skating below average. I'd probably list it as average for a guy of his size. I think he's an average skater. Puck skills, average. I'd honestly go below average. Hockey sense, average. I agree. Compete above average is where I would have it. Corey Pronman had it listed as average. I think Doc's got some good compete in him and has understood the power forward mold better in the last year or so. Shot above average, definitely. He has a really strong shot, even though I think he's going to score more goals in the dirty areas. The shot and goal scoring is going to be the best offensive asset always for Colton Dach. But there are all the Blackhawks prospects who cracked Corey Pronman's U23 NHL player ranking. Interestingly enough, Frank Nazar didn't wind up on this list once again. Corey Pronman gave U23 rankings prior to the season. I broke them down on the show. Frank Nazar wasn't on that list. Frank Nazar still isn't on. How is Frank Nazar not in the top 150 U23 players in the NHL? So maybe you got to take what Corey Pronman says with a little bit of a grain of salt. What I will say is, as someone who covers the Blackhawks, like, it's hard to keep up with prospects of every single team and put them in order and have them ranked correctly, right? Like, there are going to be some guys who sip through the cracks. But to not have Frank Nazar in there is absolutely crazy. I mean, I'd probably have him behind Connor Bedard in terms of Blackhawks on this list. I'd have Frank Nazar ahead of Rinzel, ahead of Korchinski, ahead of Levshinov. That's how highly I think of Frank Nazar. Also, no Nick Lardis, no Marek Vanacker on this list are probably the two other surprises. Vanacker as a first-round selection, probably more so than Lardis. but he is the leading goal scorer in the OHL. So those are probably the three omissions by Corey Pronman here on this list. But there's everything I had to say about Corey Pronman's U23 NHL player rankings. Coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, before I close out today's episode, got to talk briefly about Chris O'Hearn being hired by the Blackhawks. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube right now or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, before I close out today's show, Blackhawks fans, one thing I did want to be sure to bring up. A few days ago, the Blackhawks reportedly named Chris O'Hearn as their new Vice President of Hockey Operations. For those of you like myself who had never heard of Chris O'Hearn before the Blackhawks hired him, he spent 6 years with the Arizona Coyotes in their front office, starting as the Director of Hockey Administration in 2012 and moving all the way up to Assistant General Manager from 2015 to 2019. Then after departing the Coyotes organization, he became the Director of Hockey Administration for 2 years with the Minnesota Wild before getting promoted and becoming their Assistant General Manager for 2 years as well. The two sides did mutually part ways under kind of interesting circumstances in December of 2023. There was actually a couple of investigations going on from outside firms on the Minnesota Wild. I never heard any finalized reports on Chris O'Hearn or any other members of the Minnesota Wild, but considering what the Chicago Blackhawks have been through over the last half decade, right? Like, you got to think they did their research on Chris O'Hearn before hiring him, because if something comes out, this is going to wind up looking like a disaster for Kyle Davidson. I'm hoping that he did all his due diligence to make sure everything was okay with Chris O'Hearn during his time with the Minnesota Wild. But what O'Hearn does, why he was brought on with the Arizona Coyotes, why he was brought on with the Minnesota Wild, is because he's an attorney and he specializes in contract negotiations and the CBA. This guy's a numbers cruncher. He knows how to get the best out of trades and he knows how to punch numbers. He's been involved in terms of, many three-way deals with the Minnesota Wild and the Arizona Coyotes, figuring out cap and how teams are going to have to retain salary. He just is a numbers guy and knows how to make everything work on the books. And Michael Russo, that's his name, of The Athletic, wrote up a really great piece last December about O'Hearn's departure from the Minnesota Wild, how it left them in a precarious position, and all of the good work that he did for Wild general manager Billy Guerin in his couple of years there. And after him leaving, it left them in a really tough spot because they didn't have a guy like Chris O'Hearn who's as good with contract negotiations, CBA, or numbers as he is. And with the Chicago Blackhawks, look, I know they're at the bottom of the standings. Their financials don't mean a whole heck of a lot right here, right now, but that's going to change. Connor Bedard is obviously going to need his entry-level contract. Frank Nazar, Kevin Korchinski, the list goes on and on and on and on. And then we know eventually, whether it's going to be this summer, the next summer, whenever, the Blackhawks are going to be big fish in terms of the free agent market. And they got to be very, very careful, as we've learned from, Brent Seabrook and some of the bad contracts for the Chicago Blackhawks over the years. You got to be really careful with those types of deals. The Seth Jones deal, right? Like, you got to be careful whether you got to be careful with those types of contracts. You got to make sure that they go well. And bringing in a guy like Chris O'Hearn, who has experience with this type of stuff, especially when Kyle Davidson is a first-time general manager and, maybe gave out too much money to TJ Brody, Teuvo Teravainen, and Tyler Bertuzzi in the offseason to kind of clean that stuff up. I like the addition of Chris O'Hearn, a veteran in that aspect, to be added to the Blackhawks front office to help with these types of discussions, to make sure contract negotiations go well with Korchinski, Bedard, all the young guys, and the future free agents of the Chicago Blackhawks. I definitely think this is the correct call by Kyle Davidson and the front office, again, if they did their due diligence on Chris O'Hearn. But definitely wanted to be sure to bring that up here on the show, because I do think that is a noteworthy addition to the Blackhawks front office, particularly as we head closer to the trade deadline. The Blackhawks have a lot of cap space that they'll probably weaponize and try to utilize for assets in return. Chris O'Hearn can absolutely help in that type of stuff, as well as maybe Landon Rantanen or Mitch Marner in the summer. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Help me reach my goal of 2,000 subscribers. And also go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. So that way you can tune in through whatever podcast app you use to catch the show on the go. Until the next episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.